Good morning, everyone, and welcome to JNUC Day 2. Bring up Sean and Matt here for Jamf Connect and ADFS stories from the field. And afterwards, if there are any questions or time left, I want to point out there's a microphone on the left and right. If you do have any questions after the presentation and we have some time, feel free to line up at those microphones and we'll be able to take those questions. Thank you.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much for having us. Looks like Dean might have to order those turkeys in. Ha ha ha.
The 500 turkey. Oh, my mic's on. Dang.
So let's start off, and there is a set of EarPod Pros going for anybody that can guess my accent by the end of the session. Joke, there isn't a pair of EarPod Pros, but if you'd like to try it, more than welcome. So let's just quickly run through an introduction to myself and Matt, basically. Myself, Sean Michael Bernardo. I work for Insight Direct as a enterprise solutions architect, focusing more on the pre-sales side of things and focusing on Apple and Mac within the enterprise. Been doing kind of what I've been doing for probably around the last 8 years, but have been within IT for probably the last 15 to 16 years of my career. And on Saturdays, I enjoy chasing elephants around in my backyard.
And Matt Wilson, I'm a senior engineer at Insight, as well, more on the delivery side of things, focused on the Apple space and mobile device management with Jamf, and we've been doing it about 3 years.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Just an interesting segue. Matt called me up last weekend, and he was on his weekends. He loves troubleshooting Mac, and he mentioned that he had a trouble finding the bouncing beach ball. You know, when things go wrong on Mac, you typically get a beach ball. Matt, did you ever find the solution to that beach ball?
I did. And yeah, the solution was actually at the Jamf booth. I think it was over there. So it took advantage of some of our managed services, to solve that issue.
Cool. So what are we going to be talking about today? So today is about our experience of deploying Jamf Connect in the field when we have ADFS or hybrid identity in the mix. So we're going to kind of just dissect very quickly what ADFS is, kind of the what's, the whys, the where's, the risks. We're going to go into the types of authentication methods leveraged by Jamf Connect to connect to ADFS, or what you'll find to go around ADFS.
In a hybrid environment.
In a hybrid environment. Oh, thank you very much. Do you want to? No, that's good. All right. Don't worry, we shoot each other down quite regularly here, so it's a comedy act, and you can donate at the door on your way out. And then we're going to go into a couple of the scenarios that we've encountered in the field, and then some recommendations we've put together, which kind of will work their way out and should kind of be there at the forefront of your mind already by the time we get to that topic. And then as Insight, what is it that we do today and can do for you around Jamf, around Apple, and in your enterprise? And then we'll have a Q&A session, which is where the microphones kind of come into play. So with further ado, let's hit it off. And what is ADFS? And ADFS is a cloud-based identity model, or a claims-based identity model, sorry. What a claim is ultimately a set of attributes from Active Directory. So when an authentication request or attempt is made to ADFS, that claim is unpacked and those attributes match to Active Directory, and if those are all satisfactory, you get authorization in. So very simplistically, claims-based identity model. Where do we see ADFS typically, and where is it used? So it's typically used when we're trying to integrate or provide access to external access to applications on our internal network. It was thought up and implemented and resolved and obviously simplified access to these third party, and it solved the authentication challenges that we were seeing within the enterprise. ADFS, as you know, is an infrastructure-based solution that is something that needs to be set up and deployed and installed on Windows-based services. Why is it there? Hey, it provides single sign-on and it provides identity federation. What we've seen through some of the implementations of Jamf Connect with a hybrid identity and ADFS is there's three risks that we continuously keep coming upon. Maintenance costs, complexity, and security. I'm going to touch on complexity first and foremost because there's the old adage of KISS, keep it simple, stupid, which in many of the implementations is that it hasn't been followed, and ADFS has become pretty complex, pretty big, and a behemoth within an organization. So if you are going down the ADFS path or you have ADFS, try and keep it simple. It makes our lives easier from an integration standpoint and will make your lives easier from a maintenance and security standpoint. Obviously, ADFS requires that infrastructure to run on, so there is this maintenance element that continuously needs to care and feed for ADFS. So as organizations start moving more to the cloud, the collapsing of ADFS becomes kind of pertinent in that regard to reduce that maintenance cost and time spent to keep those services up and running. And then ultimately there's the security. We are installing, or ADFS has been installed on Windows-based services, so Windows-based services aren't patched, aren't looked after. You're creating holes within your actual environment. And bearing in mind that you are publishing external services out to the internet, that could put your organization in a detrimental path from a security standpoint. So Matt, there's 3 forms of authentication methods when we want to connect with or play with Jamf in a hybrid identity environment. Can you just start stepping us through some of those?
Correct. So the first option here is federated integration, and this is what allows you to, I guess, have an application that's directly authenticating to your ADFS environment, kind of circumventing Azure AD altogether. If it is the only thing you have available or configured in your environment, it's a good way to go to get you to utilizing Jamf Connect as fast as possible. Go to the next slide.
Next, yeah.
And this diagram here is we're going to kind of step through that authentication process with Jamf Connect Login and Jamf Connect Verify as it's authorizing and authenticating the user.
And by the way, Matt geeks out on this stuff, by the way. This is his breakfast in the morning. Never mind Cheerios, it's authentication workflows.
Yep, so we have Jamf Connect Login in the bottom left-hand corner, and this is where the user would enter their Azure AD username and password in that splash screen, and it's going to take their identity and pass it off to Azure AD to validate the user's identity, not necessarily the password. But so we're going to go to Azure AD. Do you want me to click through? And then it's going to send back an access code or an authorization code back to Jamf Connect Login. It's going to pass it up to the endpoint token in Azure AD, and then Azure AD is actually going to provide a Mario token. No, a refresh token, an access token, and an ID for that user back to Jamf Connect. And then Jamf Connect is going to then ask for the user's AD password one more time to then validate that user, or authorize that user against ADFS. ADFS is going to present another cool coin and pass it down to Jamf Connect. And then once that whole process happens seamlessly in the background, the user has successfully authenticated, and this is where Jamf Connect is going to then create that local account for the user based on their ADFS or their Azure AD credentials.
Cool. And next we're going to just touch on, I guess, the verify post.
And then once they land on the desktop, this is when the user would sign into Jamf Connect Verify with their network password. Jamf Connect then sends that that password to ADFS. Authenticates the user, passes the access token back, and then at this point, if the passwords are the same, we don't have to go any further. Everything's in sync, everything's jiving, file vault's happy. Or if the local password is different than the network password, Jamf Connect then says, hey, we noticed they're out of sync. Would you like to sync them up? This is where that happens.
So obviously to get this all working, preference files are required.
And then we have our plist.
Well,
you didn't.
hey,
First time doing this, sorry. No.
Trigger finger, right?
So yeah, great. Okay, so the preference file, and it may be a little small on the board. You don't have to memorize it. Jamf makes this documented very well. But the top half of these 2 files, Jamf Connect Log and Jamf Connect Verify, are what's absolutely required if you were going to go into a cloud identity provider.
And this is around federated identity still?
With federated identity. Well, in general. If
Okay.
you're just doing a cloud-based identity,
Okay.
you just need the top half. What's in the red box there is what's needed when you're doing a federated identity. So we're going to have to tell Jamf Connect we're going to use a custom endpoint and direct it to your federated services URL as you provide that external.
So that's one of the three, and I think we've
Right.
got another two now, which we're going to talk about password hash synchronization and then just pass-through authentication.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So with password hash synchronization, this is more along the lines of what Microsoft is wanting everybody to move to. It allows us to treat Azure AD as if it was the single point of truth cloud identity. We're pushing our users and our passwords up to Azure AD. And with pass-through authentication, almost the same but slightly different. There's an agent that you actually have to have in your AD environment that in real time authenticates the user, but in the same way we're able to circumvent ADFS and authenticate directly to Azure AD.
So both of these methods circumvent ADFS. Cool. So statement, not a question. So let's go through that workflow then of what password hash synchronization and
Yep.
pass-through authentication
And
look through.
similarly to the other flow, Jamf Connect login asks the user to sign into the Azure AD portal, sends the ID to Azure AD to verify the identity of the user. We get the same access code, go to the token endpoint in Azure AD, we get the same refresh token ID and access token. Jamf Connect then passes the user's password to Azure AD. Azure AD hashes that password and compares it to the hash it's received from AD through a directory sync, passes the access token back, and then again, this is where Jamf Connect goes about creating the local user account based on the Azure AD password, or Azure AD account. And then once we get into the user space, again, Jamf Connect Verify requests the password from the user. We then compare the hash of that password with what it's received from Azure AD through the Azure AD sync. We get an access token back, and then we're either good to go because every local and network are in sync and alignment, or we ask the user if they want to sync their password. And then similarly with the preference files, the main difference here is our ROPG provider, or is going to be Azure V2, this is really cool. Recently with Jamf Connect, they were able to take advantage of additional endpoints in Azure AD to allow for integrating into the hybrid environment.
Thank you very much, Matt. So we felt it pertinent that we kind of brief you a bit on ADFS and what it is, etc., but also how Jamf Connect can leverage ADFS or ultimately bypass ADFS. And this sets us up nice for some of the scenarios that we're going to encounter. And it's two scenarios in particular that we found that we wanted to share with you because they did pose some unique challenges, but they also very much align with what we talked about around complexity and management and as well as security. So in the first scenario, customer unnamed, this particular customer was looking for a strategic partner that could provide them with guidance and best practice around enabling Mac OS management within their organization. They weren't a Jamf customer, nor did they have Jamf Connect, so there was an education piece there that had to occur. They had 30 Macs, roughly there or thereabouts, and looking to scale to about 200. Now, I think this number kind of represents what we see fairly commonly within organizations is start out with a splattering of Mac, and as acceptance of Mac is taken up and it's started to see as an equal citizen to the Windows counterpart, we see more and more Macs coming kind of in. So I think this very much speaks to some of the trend we're seeing in some of the other presentations that have mentioned kind of the same numbers, etc. And they, as a customer, did try and implement a Mac pilot or Mac management. They used Parallels. It failed miserably, and based on the relationship we had with the customer, we were brought in to assist them further. Now, our typical approach as far as being able to get to a point where we have a successful deployment is around assess, design, deploy. in this scenario and in the next scenario, we did do a knowledge transfer. Now, that doesn't necessarily replace the Jamf Pro training, but what it does is it gathers all of the documentation, all of the way that we've done things and set up a successful solution for the customer and pass that across to the admin so the admin is not left in the dark ultimately. Our assess element, we gather use cases and we gather the customer's requirements in that stage. We then formulate a design based on all of that. So there's a documentation package that's given to the customer. And then based on their sign-off and acceptance of that design, we go and we deploy the solution and then test, retest, and test again, and then complete a knowledge transfer with the customer. So Matt, there's a couple of things that we're going to discuss here. And one is, what was their ADFS environment? What were the challenges and ultimately the outcome of this implementation? So take it away.
In this particular customer environment, they did have Azure AD, ADFS, and AD configured in their environment, and they had ADFS Federation was basically the only thing available to them, and that presented a number of challenges, which we'll get to here in a second. The first one was more around the, I guess, knowledge or education of what is password hash synchronization, what is password authentication, and it turns out that not the Mac side of the Mac admins, but actually the AD admins and security folks weren't comfortable moving their organization from password hash synchronization, or to password hash synchronization from password authentication.
So in this scenario with these challenges posed and obviously the admins as well as the SecOps element, we're kind of showing that we've got to work with the teams within the organization still to kind of educate and obviously get acceptance of the way that we wish to.
Right, making sure the right folks are in the room, yeah.
Cool.
And then just that second bullet there under challenges, that we had to basically decide, are we going to upgrade our ADFS environment? Because there's a requirement with Jamf Connect that it needs to be Server 2016 and an ADFS version 4. And their environment was so, I guess, old or dated that they couldn't even handle federated integration. So they ended up going with password authentication, since that's more of a stepping stone to getting to that ultimate password hash synchronization.
So again, kind of that maintenance element we're talking about.
Right, and then we had
potentially aligning with security issues.
And going through the whole communication with every team to make sure they're aware, because this will change your authentication workflow across the organization.
Okay. And successful outcome at the end?
Yep. And so once we did get password authentication configured, it was very easy to then build out our configuration to leverage, so that Jamf Connect could leverage password authentication.
Did we get a good CSAT score?
I think that's still out right now. But yeah, no, that's great.
Cool. So second scenario, we're going to see again some commonalities, and a current Jamf Pro customer implemented and integrated. Were you flexing again?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, threw me off, Matt. They had 90 Macs under management, roughly thereabouts. Post the Jamf Pro element and coming up to the end, Jamf Pro implementation and coming up to the end of this year, they're looking to deploy 900 plus Macs. What they wanted was to improve that end user experience, and implementing and integrating JC into that, or Jamf Connect, would certainly help them go a long way in achieving that. So they wanted to leverage JC for its main functionality or core functions, which is that provisioning that local user account, as well as taking advantage of that account password synchronization. There was a red flag raised early in the project lifecycle around single sign-on. Now, while Jamf Connect can indeed be an enabler and take advantage of, it isn't a single sign-on solution. And I think that needs to be kind of highlighted in red, bolded, scratched, whatever, but it isn't a replacement for a single sign-on solution. How did we get around that? We tap danced a little, we held hands, we sung Kumbaya, and eventually we just had a good conversation with the customer, right? We did essentially have some Jamf help in that conversation just to kind of smooth the waters, but ultimately it was all good and we continued with said project. So again, a methodology that we use and we swear by, our assess, design, deploy, and again in this instance was that knowledge transfer element. So Matt, want to walk us through the challenges and the outcome? And their environments,
Well,
of
we'll
course.
cover their, yeah, so
Yep.
their environment, similar to the previous one, Azure AD, ADFS, AD on the back end. What was good about this environment is they already were leveraging password hash synchronization. So we could, in theory, go straight to Azure AD as our single point of truth for our identity of the users. But the challenges there were initially determining the structure of their AD environment and Azure AD environment, because at least in our experience, customers are like, yep, I have Azure AD, good to go, let's get everything set up and configured. But it turns out once you kind of get in there and peer inside their environment and talk to the right folks, they actually have ADFS in the back end federating into their Azure environment. And just one thing to touch too on password hash synchronization, in the vanilla configuration, Azure AD is still the fallback should the ADFS authentication fail. It falls over to Azure AD, so that was a challenge we'll talk to here in a minute. They also had a separate domain defined in AD and Azure AD. While it is possible to allow Kerberos to cross domains, they didn't have that configured in their environment, so they weren't able to leverage Jamf Connect for that Kerberos ticket to pass to web apps for O365 and things like that for a single seamless sign-on.
Okay.
And then around customer understanding, as Sean mentioned, they heard SSO and Kerberos. They're like, great, Jamf Connect's going to solve all our problems with single sign-on. It's not necessarily designed to do that. It can take advantage of it, but it's definitely not the SSO provider. It enables another SSO element, in this case, Kerberos. And then in the middle of our project, macOS, as it does, came out with an update. Jamf Connect had this ability to go into the keychain on behalf of the user when their password is going to change or sync through Jamf Connect to update other keychain items. But in 10.14.4, Apple removed the ability for us to go in and change keychain items on behalf of another user.
Cool, thank you.
So just kind of understanding that landscape, and sometimes things happen with OS.
Okay.
Updates.
And our outcome.
And then as far as the outcome, it's even though all those challenges were there, we still got them to a place where they were happy. We were able to get their users to authenticate into Azure AD with their credentials, same credentials, deploy the local user account, and take advantage of Jamf Connect Login's notify mechanism. If you're familiar with dep notify, similar splash screen. And the scripting engine that we're able to leverage to then deploy apps and packages and whatnot, and keep the user informed as what's going on with their device, because as you know, there's nothing worse than the user closing their lid right after they log in or pull the power or disconnect from the network. So having that there was a great benefit.
Okay, great. So based on these implementations and others that we've done, we've got some recommendations which are kind of they've boiled up now, and we just want to re-emphasize, I guess, to the audience what those recommendations would be.
Yep. So, and these are kind of in the order of what's available to you in your environment. If you have ADFS and federated integration in your environment, go ahead and leverage that, because that's going to be the quickest way to get Jamf Connect usable for your users. And then either come up with a game plan or stepping stone to move to the other two authentication steps, which we're going to talk about next. And then if password hash synchronization or password auth are available to you, then great. You're good to go. It makes our life easier, make your life easier from a management standpoint.
Yep.
And,
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's all great.
Groovy.
Okay, good stuff. So as insights, and this was a bit of a sales pitch, so...
And we wanted to have, it's not as dark of a room as the keynote, so we couldn't blind you with the light slide. But.
So we as Insight, we do have a booth here today, and there's a common question of what is Insight, and it's not a software inspection, and we don't do anything of those lights. We don't provide you with insights. We're an organization, a value-added reseller with services that come in and support the full life cycle of your devices. So everything from device ordering, device provisioning, kitting, into MDM management, so managed services on behalf of, or recently we've just been acknowledged as an MSP within the Jamf space, so thank you. So you can certainly from us get your Jamf instance at a cost per device per month with a managed service wraparound. And then very importantly is the reverse logistics element of this. So in most organizations, or in a lot that we've seen, is if a C-level or somebody along those lines has a Mac that's defective or breaks, they send them through to the App Store or to the Apple Store essentially. And that just wastes time, wastes productivity, etc. Insight can get that device back, send out another device, and essentially get your executive or even yourself working in a more quicker fashion, essentially, rather than standing in a queue at the Apple Store. So there's a whole reverse logistics elements, but from a key piece is accelerating that device adoption, but bringing innovation into that work stream to essentially allow you to support your users in a adequate and timely fashion. And if you need to discuss this a little bit further, or we want to discuss it a little bit further, as I mentioned, we do have a booth. There's a whole raft of lovely looking individuals here at the bottom row that will gladly answer any questions and assist with anything in that regard. Matt, do you have anything else to add?
I didn't prepare anything, but no, I don't have anything.
So let's open this up to the audience. If anybody does have any questions, please step up and let's...
And if you do have any accessibility needs and need me to bring a microphone to you, just wave and I'll be more than happy to come over for you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, thanks. As consultants, when coming into a customer environment for the first time, are there any specific tools that you use to perform discovery about the environment if that information isn't quite forthcoming from the customer, or they're gathering the right people to even give you that information, or is gathering that information just best done by actually talking to the people who administer that stuff?
We've certainly found success in discussions, bringing people together, the right people together, and that means sending or giving the customer a set of prerequisites prior to an engagement to say, we need A, B, and C at the table with us. Having those discussions, documenting each and every item, and that's typically done through an assessment-based approach, where we will gather information not only about the environment, but how are you managing devices today, how are you wanting to manage devices, and who is going to be managing these devices, but also, very importantly, who are your end users of these devices. So understanding those use cases, etc. So I don't think a tool set can solve for that, but rather a discussion, face-to-face, eye-to-eye, handshake to handshake, kind of makes a world of difference in that regard.
Yeah, thanks.
Pleasure. Everybody's leaving.
Solved all your
Matt,
questions.
take your shirt off.
No, jeez. There's some kind of violation there or something.
Well, I think the long and short of it is you guys answered every question so
Great.
well.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Sean and Matt, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.